Okay, we'll be happy to take some questions. We've got a couple of microphones, and yeah, Bill. I'm not sure if the mics are on or not. Just speak up.
In the studies, is there a minimum of 9 adjectives to be a real expert in the predictive studies? And secondly, is there a hierarchy that was at least valid yesterday? You know, if I go back to the old idea of if you have an endangered animal that's hungry and he sees an endangered plant, what should the park warden do? So is there, you know, can you give us an idea of the hierarchy of the victim?
The victim, yes, there is a very definite hierarchy. Race trumps everything. And then comes gender. And then below that, let's see, what else do we have? Like sexual orientation. And then the other ones come in, I don't know, in order that I'm not clear on. What was was there another question?
Yeah, how many adjectives do you have to use to be a good professor?
Well, yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, there's a jargon all its own, and I mean, I do write about it in the book, actually. I can give you a little dose of that. Where is that? And of course, the point of this jargon is not really to communicate anything. It's to impress. It's to obfuscate. It's to make the outsiders feel as if something impressive is going on here, and it's to keep the outsiders outsiders. Like, for example, that words like problematize. This is another way of saying discuss. Interrogate. This is another way of saying discuss. Intervene. You know, people say, for example, the jacket of a recent jacket copy of a recent academic book described it as an important intervention in contemporary linguistic and semiotic debate. This means discuss. And there's plenty of other words like this, and it really is. I mean, education in these disciplines is really, to a very large extent, a matter of teaching kids to talk that way and write that way. And they don't realize, because they've never been in college before, they don't realize that this isn't really an education. They realize they're being hornswoggled. They don't realize, that they're being hornswoggled. Yes. Yes?
Okay. So I'm a student at Carleton University.
Yeah.
I do come across this particular sort of viewpoint from friends and colleagues and professors. And the language barrier, as you're sort of indicating, is really a big problem. And I'm going to use one of those words right now to ask my question. And it's called intersectionality. I don't know if you've come across it.
Oh yeah, I write about that quite a bit in the book.
Okay, and I was just wondering, how do you feel that, because I think there's some who go into that sort of direction on intersectionality, and they use it to sort of mitigate the ridiculousness of the really hard stuff that we were just talking about. And they sort of explain it as there are individuals at every level who are both oppressing and being oppressed all at the same time.
Yeah.
I don't know if you talk about that.
I do talk about that in the book, and intersectionality is a very simple concept that people in these studies discuss as if it were nuclear science. And it's the basic idea is that if you are a black lesbian, you are discriminated against as a black, and as a woman, and as a homosexual. But the degree to which you are a victim is greater than the sum of those parts. To be discriminated against as a black and a woman and homosexual is different from just being discriminated, the sum of all three of those kinds of discrimination. That's what intersectionality means. And and then to that you can add all kinds of other things, as has happened in the last generation or so. There's and increasingly in the last few years, different groups are increasingly being recognized as legitimate victim groups within the academic setting. And so then you can add fat to the mix, you can add all kinds of things to the mix. There's things that they haven't gotten to yet, You know, there are all kinds of ways in which people are, quote, victimized in society that you know, they haven't gotten around to yet. But, and it is true that, you know, where you get to a certain point where, you know, you would think that they would realize this whole thing is ridiculous, because you start piling on all these different victim identities, and you'd think that they'd start to approach the realization that, yeah, life is kind of very complicated, and it's a matter of gray areas, and it's not just, you know, victims over here and oppressors over there, but somehow they never get to that point. And instead what you get is you get a lot of people who, well, like the woman who's running for Senate in Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren. You get someone, you know, like who has managed to, you know, she identified herself as an American Indian, which turns out not to have been the case, but it's okay because it was a family tradition. But she managed to, you know, really climb up the academic ladder very quickly because she ticked off that box. And so you get a lot of academics who are desperate to find some label to attach to themselves. If, you know, especially if you're a white, you know, like a white man or a white woman who's just a woman in this, but there's other women who are other things, and you want to find. That's why, you know, that's Elizabeth Warren's problem. She was only a woman. Otherwise, as a woman, she was a victim, but as a white person, she was an oppressor, and she just needed to find some, you know, and as heterosexual, she was an oppressor, so she needed to find some other, you know, label, victim label, so she could compete with, you know, people at multiple labels. Anyway, so it's so much fun.
No, now it's my turn.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, hey, okay.
Yeah.
I'm somebody who was long a women's studies prof and a humanities prof.
Yeah.
And I know you don't have to teach that way, but yes, I totally back it. Most people do. And it's incredibly frustrating. And in fact, one reason I left tenured professorship is like I was so sick of having brain damaged students come into my classes, taught by other people.
Yes.
And unbrain damaging them. And I just went, it's too small. My interest is like, what are the pressure points on a larger scale to change the education system? Otherwise, if you just get like 40 students and 40 and 40, and you're like, by the end they've learned, but there's just going to be another batch coming along. Yeah. I know that as an individual prof, you can teach differently, especially with tenure. You can break it out. But in the end, it's like, what am I doing with my drops in the bucket? And my real interest is, and I did a lot of doctoral studies on research on the identity politics and how do you break through that middle stage where, you know, it's the hierarchies of the oppressed.
Where did you teach? Do you want to say or no?
Oh, I've taught McGill and Concordia at the university level, and then I got tenure position at John Abbott College because I had to leave Quebec if I wanted tenure and at the university level.
No, I've at the conferences, I've heard women's studies professors, mostly older ones who were obviously tenured, complaining that, I mean, and these were women who were, had some degree of loyalty to I mean, and some of them were second-generation feminists. I mean, you're talking about, you know, some of them were old enough to have been second-generation feminists from the women's movement of the 70s. You know, and some of them were, you know, people who were in on the founding of women's studies, and who bought to some extent into some of the ideology, but not entirely, and who still held on to some of the second-generation attitudes about, you know, we should stand up for women who are victims of patriarchy, you know, in the non-Western world. But they, and I've heard that, as I say, I've heard them at these conferences complaining that they have students who were taught by younger and more zealous women's studies professors, and the students can be like, you know, kids who you know, it reminds you of the stories about kids in Stalinist Russia snitching on their parents, you know, and just, and they're ideological police.
Oh, I'll give you. The more politically correct women were often slaughtered in their classes, and I was called into a couple of other women's studies classes to stop the slaughter. Yeah. And they were white women who were being slaughtered by their students, who were lesbian and non-white. And I came in and stopped it, and that was because I wasn't part of the myth, and I just said the class has to be safe. In my classes, nobody dared touch me, even though I didn't claim any oppression. And that's because I never set it up in ranges of victimhood, but in terms of safety for all. So I did find individual strategies to make it safe, but the big question for me is how do we break through that mindset that you're talking about? And I did a lot of doctoral research on that, but I really find that that's the cusp of it, so I'm totally agreeing with you. At the end of my point.
No, one thing that something you said that reminded me of this is that in a lot of these women's studies situations, you have women who were founders, women who consider themselves among the founders of modern feminism, and they're because they're heterosexual, they are the younger lesbians in women's studies treat them as if they're second-class citizens and they're not as legitimately feminist as the lesbians are because the straight women are sleeping with the enemy.
Don't position themselves.
Oh, no, go to the next.
First of all, congratulations for getting through all that with a straight face. And for Elizabeth Warren, which you did bring up, this is a sort of new thing you brought up. What you have to do is the Alinsky thing. Mark Stein invented the nickname Pocahontas. Call her Pocahontas all the time. If you meet her at a conference, say, I'm Pocahontas, or I'm Pocahontas. Because you've got to jiu-jitsu these guys back with their stuff. And this is what my point's about. I'm going to make this statement. Without foreign language learning, actual foreign language learning, diversity and multiculturalism is fluff and has no place in academia. What's the opposite of diversity? University. And, so try and get an insistence in those guys, they learn the bloody foreign languages. Learn a real African language like Swahili or Hausa or one of those. This Ebonics doesn't count.
Yeah.
Ebonics, in fact, in Russian means F up. Tell them that. But really, you're backed. Yovali. How many people know Russian or maybe Polish or another Slavic language? Don't let them get away with this stuff. Jiu-jitsu them, because it's like we're against Israeli apartheid. What are these idiots thinking of? And why are we letting them get away with it? Thanks.
I'd just like to know if you have a feeling